Your parent called you last week, maybe it was a Sunday afternoon, or maybe it was during a visit that felt ordinary until it suddenly did not, and they said something like, "I want you to have this." The watch your grandfather wore every single day for 40 years. The ring they have never once taken off. The chair that has sat in the same corner of the living room for your entire life. And something about the way they said it made you go quiet in a way you were not expecting. You said thank you. You changed the subject, and then you drove home and you sat with a feeling you could not name, because it did not feel like a gift. It felt like something else, something heavier, something that made your chest tighten in a way you did not want to look at directly. You are not imagining that feeling, and you are not wrong for having it. What is happening when a parent starts giving things away is one of the most psychologically significant events in a family's life. And almost no one understands what it actually means. So let's talk about what is really happening in their brain. First, we need to understand what objects actually are to an aging person, not what we assume they are, not clutter, not things they no longer need. Research published in the Gerontologist, one of the most respected peer-reviewed journals in aging science, found that cherished possessions in older adults function as extensions of identity. They are not separate from the person who owns them. They are part of how that person has understood themselves across a lifetime. The watch is not a watch. It is every morning your grandfather got up before anyone else and put it on because he was the kind of man who showed up. The ring is not jewelry. It is a marriage, a decade, a promise that survived things you will never fully know. The chair is not furniture. It is where your parents sat to think, to rest, to be fully themselves when no one was watching. These objects are not possessions in the ordinary sense. They are biography made physical. Psychologist Russell Belk first formalized this idea in what researchers now call the extended self theory. The concept is simple, and once you understand it, changes how you see everything inside your parents' home. What we own becomes part of who we are, not metaphorically, psychologically. The self reaches outward and incorporates the things we use, the things we build, the things we return to again and again over decades. And when an older parent begins distributing those objects, they are not clearing space. They are doing something the brain compels them to do when it senses that time is becoming finite. They are trying to extend themselves into the future through the people they love most. Here's the term researchers use for this: symbolic legacy work. And it is not a poetic metaphor. It is a documented psychological mechanism. Researchers who interviewed older adults about the disposition of their most cherished possessions found something consistent across every conversation. Every meaningful transfer of an object was intended to send what they called a meaning bundle. Not just the object, the story inside it, the identity it carried, the piece of the person that had lived inside that thing for decades. When your parent hands you that watch or that ring or that chair, they are not giving you something to put on a shelf. They are giving you a piece of who they are and trusting you to carry it forward after they no longer can. An antique is just an old object, but an heirloom has a genealogy. That is not a poetic line. That is the precise distinction researchers in gerontology use to separate a thing from a legacy. The genealogy is the story. Your parent is trying to give you the genealogy while they still can. Now here's the developmental framework that explains why this is happening now in this specific season of life and not 10 years ago. Erik Erikson, whose theory of human psychological development remains foundational across the entire field, identified the final stage of life as a confrontation between what he called ego integrity and despair. This stage typically begins in the 60s and extends to the end of life. And its central question is urgent in a way most younger people cannot fully imagine. Did my life mean something? Did I matter? Will something of who I was survive after I am gone? Erikson described this as a retrospective accounting of one's life, a reckoning with whether it added up to something real and lasting. Erikson's work was extended by psychologists McAdams and de St. Aubin, whose research on generativity identified what they called the inner desire for symbolic immortality. Not literal immortality, symbolic, the deep psychological need to place something of yourself into the hands of the people who come after you so that when you are no longer here, a piece of you still is. This drive is not morbid. It is not about death. It is about continuity. It is one of the most fundamentally human things a brain can do, and it becomes most urgent, most impossible to ignore in the final chapters of a life. That object your parent gave you is the physical form of that drive. It is them saying, without the words for it, this was mine. Now it is yours. And when you hold it, some part of me will still exist in the world. That is what was in the room when they said, I want you to have this. That is the weight you felt and could not name. Most children receive these objects and and feel one of two things. Some feel grief they are not ready for and quickly redirect towards something easier. Others feel nothing at first and then feel it later, alone in the car on the drive home, or in the dark at 2 in the morning when the house is quiet and something just lands. Both responses are normal, both are the mind protecting itself from something it does not yet have language for, and both leave the moment incomplete. Because here is what most families never do. They never ask the question the moment is actually asking. They never say, "Tell me about this." Where did it come from? What does it mean to you? Why this one? And why me? And why now? Because here is what the research on legacy and end-of-life psychology consistently shows. What older adults need in these moments is not someone who gracefully accepts the object and moves on. What they need is a witness. They need someone to receive not just the thing, but the story inside the thing. Research in palliative psychology found that when older adults are able to transmit not just possessions, but the values and meanings attached to them, they report significantly greater psychological well-being and reduced existential anxiety. The act of giving is incomplete without the act of receiving fully. And receiving fully means sitting still long enough to let them tell you what it means. Even the parts that take time, even the parts that go somewhere unexpected. There's a specific kind of guilt that adult children carry when a parent starts giving things away. It does not announce itself loudly. It sits quietly in the background. It is the guilt of avoidance, of the times you changed the subject because the real one felt too big, of the visits where you talked about schedules and food and everything except what actually mattered, of the questions you never asked because you were afraid of where they might lead. That guilt is not useful on its own. But it is information. It is your nervous system telling you that something important has been in the room for a long time, and the window for walking toward it instead of around it is not unlimited. Guilt without action is just weight, and the action here is simpler than you might think. It does not require a formal conversation about death. It does not require you to say anything you are not ready to say. It only requires you to slow down. To hold the object and ask, what is the story here? Where did this come from? What do you want me to know about it? You will not be opening a door to despair. You will be doing the opposite. You will be giving your parent the one thing developmental psychology tells us aging people need most in this stage of life. You will be confirming that their life had weight, that the things they carried mattered, that they will not pass through the world without leaving a mark on the people who loved them. So the next time your parent says they want you to have something, do not just say thank you and move on. Ask them to tell you. Sit down. Let the conversation run longer than feels comfortable. Let it go to the places that make your eyes sting and your chest feel full. Because what is happening in that moment is not your parent preparing to leave. It is your parent trying to stay. In the only language aging knows how to speak. Through the objects, through the stories, through you. If this gave you something real today, share it with a sibling, with a cousin, with anyone who has ever received something from a parent and felt that nameless weight and never knew what to do with it. They need this translation, and the person who gave them that object needs them to have it.